you a heads up that it is the Epiphany. Let's start there. It didn't sound like the Epiphany in this text. So what do you know of the Epiphany? Like, what is the Epiphany? Because it's not this text that you usually hear. What do we hear? What is it?
When the wise men got there, wasn't it?
Yeah, so we normally hear a text of a star and some magi or wise people and gifts, right? Those are the sorts of things that, you know, the tradition of the Epiphany we hear. But this is the text that is in the lectionary for today. There is good news in this text. But I think we should maybe start by understanding the Epiphany. That's one of those big words, like we say it, we know it's linked to these magi. What does it actually mean? So, anybody want to take a stab at what does the Epiphany mean? No?
Isn't it kind of like when you finally see the light about something?
Yes, that's one of the meanings. That is our contemporary meaning and understanding of Epiphany, right? It's actually, I looked it up for you all, please, okay? So, the one that Susan's talking about is a usually sudden, right, sudden manifestation or perception of the essential nature or meaning of something. So it's like that aha, I had an epiphany, I get it now, like that, right? And then related to our journey and what Bernie was speaking about, it's also a manifestation of Christ to the Gentiles, hence the Magi visiting Jesus, right? Christ is shown to these Gentiles. They didn't know, they just knew something special had happened, and they were following the star, and they actually get to be in the presence of Christ. That's really extraordinary. Epiphany also is a manifestation of a divine or supernatural being. That is the focus on the star, because the star is the light of Christ, right? So that being in the star that is leading and guiding, we would say is the light of Christ, and so the star itself is a manifestation or an epiphany, right? The Magi have this epiphany of the star, and they follow that. And then they get the epiphany, the manifestation of Christ in their midst, which is really kind of cool. Hopefully, number 3, if all of that happens, we better be having an aha moment, right? It does kind of all work together. Isn't that lovely? Now, I want to start by talking about this aha moment because you need to know a little something about Matthew. He really wants some people to have an aha moment, and it is very, very obvious in this text. It's really obvious. I want you to understand a little bit about Matthew because we're following the lectionary, and this year we'll be reading from Matthew as we go through the year. So the lectionary is a 3-year cycle. It focuses on one of each of the Gospels, and then John just sort of gets weaved in there throughout all 3 years along the way. But this year is year A, and we start at the beginning again. We start with Matthew. So, did anybody else but me pick it up that Matthew had an agenda in this text? How do we know Matthew had an agenda? What phrase kept getting repeated?
Get up.
What was it?
Get up.
Get up and go, that sort of thing? Yeah, well, and that actually I think reveals a little bit of the faithfulness, because I don't know about you, we were talking about what time we get up and whatnot. I get a message to get up, I don't immediately respond to that, but Joseph somehow, he takes off running in the middle of the night even. I thought, that's faithfulness. That is faithfulness. What else? What other phrase did you hear over and over again? It's 3 times in this text. 11 verses, 3 times. Why did all this happen?
Fulfilled?
Yeah, to fulfill the prophecies, right? 3 times Matthew says, this happened to fulfill the prophecies of the Old Testament, of the Lord spoken through this prophet. Now here's the interesting thing you need to know. That is a literary device, it's not fact. As a matter of fact, the last one, which I think says, he settled in the city of Nazareth so that what was spoken through the prophets might be fulfilled, he would be called a Nazarene. The word Nazareth does not appear at all in the Old Testament. Not at all. Okay, so I'm not here to tell you, oh, Matthew's a liar. I'm here to tell you Matthew's a writer. And when you write, you use literary devices. And he is using this literary device. This fulfills what was said back here. This fulfills what was said back here. Why? His agenda is to convince the Jews, the Israelites, that Jesus is, number one, the second Moses, and that comes out throughout the story. And number two, the Messiah that they've all been waiting for. And number three, the Son of God. Right? So he's talking very specifically to a Jewish audience. And so by saying, this fulfills what was said here, who do you think knew all those prophecies? The Jews. So every time he writes that, remember in the times this would have all been read to people, would have been spoken. Every time they hear it, they go, oh yeah, back then, that was important. This guy must be important too. We should be listening up. What does he want to tell us? Right? So it's a literary device that he uses over and over again. But he clearly has an agenda. And we need to understand that agenda to really better understand what he's saying, who he's saying it to, and what that means in our life. That said, I'm going to put in my little plug for, we're going to reshape, reform the study from Tuesday evening and offer it during the day, hopefully Wednesdays, maybe around 10 if that works for people, but we can dialogue about that, because I want to teach you how to read Scripture in this way, that you understand all those influences, you understand the intention of the author, maybe some history in that, and most importantly, so you can have those ahas. Because you know what, if you only read Scripture and you just know the facts, boring. What difference does it make? None. None. But we want to have those experiences where it's like, oh, I get it now. I see Christ in my midst. I see Christ in the world around me. Oh, I get this. And this now is going to change the way I do this, the way I say this. But you understand? That's what we're out to do, not to have you memorize Scripture. And that can look all kinds of ways. So I brought a whole bunch of books. You don't have to have something on a book or whatever, but I've told people several things. Here we go. This I highly recommend for everybody. So easy to read. It's called What is the Bible? How an ancient library of poems, letters, and stories can transform the way you think and feel about everything. Huh? Doesn't this sound like it's worth reading? Like, not just read it and it'll put you to sleep. No, we want it to transform everything. Trust me, from chapter 1. You're going to have some ahas happening with this book. Very, very easy read, though. That's by Rob Bell. This book, listen to how similar, close the titles are. How the Bible Actually Works, in which I explain how an ancient, ambiguous, and diverse book leads us to wisdom rather than answers, and why that's great news. Again, isn't this what we want? We want some wisdom. Nobody wants somebody to tell them what to do, right? That's one of the reasons why people aren't sitting in the churches, because they think that all we do is tell people what to do. No, you want wisdom so you can extract that for your life. So I highly recommend either one of these. Also, just want to plug, if you're looking to do a daily Scripture practice, Upper Room Disciplines, there's a reading for every day. You read a little bit of Scripture, have a little bit of information about that Scripture from an educated person, and then a little tiny prayer. So it comes in regular or large print. Let me know if you want one. Today would be the day to start your practice. Isn't that so convenient? Now, if you're like, I don't know about this Bible thing, I don't think I can do it. Here's another possibility for study groups. Books that are on topics like what? Oh, love, because God is what? Love. Christ, when Christ shows up in our midst. Love. And so that's what we want to learn about. So this one here is just called Love is the Way. I don't know, anybody recognize who that is? You've seen it before. It's Bishop Michael Curry. He's Bishop in the Episcopal Church. He actually married Meghan Markle, and how we love matters. Yeah, how we love, like how we define. So just some thoughts, okay? want to encourage everybody into, we say study, but it's conversation. Conversation with Scripture, conversation with each other, right? So that kind of revelation and those epiphanies can happen. And then, who knows what God could do with that? Who knows? So that's what Matthew is up to. He definitely has an agenda. You hear it in this text. But you know what? I really care more about God's agenda than Matthew's, because we're not Jewish, right? So I'm warning you now. We're going to hear some stuff from Matthew we don't want to hear. We're going to be called hypocrites this year. We're going to like that. That's what it's like in Matthew. But let's talk about what God's up to. In this text, the God that we see. Now remember, God showed up last week in Jesus, God with us. But this week, we get a revelation of who God is. God as protector, provider, nurturer even. And God uses all kinds of things to do this. Number one, dreams. So we don't get the message to go except through these dreams. Like, did you notice all over the place? Joseph has 3 different dreams in these 11 verses. And we started with, after the Magi departed. Well, we know that the Magi went back, what? Through a different road. How'd they find that out? A dream. They had a dream. So they go by a different road. Joseph has 3 different dreams in this text. One that tells him, get the hell out of Dodge, right? Get out of here. The other one that says it's okay to go back. And then when he's fearful, it says, no, don't go there, go to Galilee, right? So 3 dreams there. That, by the way, is Joseph's 4th dream, because I think it was 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, we heard the dream that Joseph had that told him to what? Marry Mary, and to name the child, right? So to essentially adopt Jesus. So Joseph has had 4 dreams in all of this. I hope some of you have some dreams to share when we're done this, right? God will use those dreams. I'm not really good at remembering my dreams. However, I do want to tell you how I connect to Joseph. All of the provision that God gives us, all of the gifts, right? He sent the Magi, and the Magi had gifts in their hands. Doesn't mean it shows up pleasant. Okay? Just because it comes from God cannot be equated and defined as pleasant to us. Right? We are not divine. Because let's look at that first dream of Joseph's again. I'd call it a nightmare. This man dreams someone is going to kill your child. That is not a pleasant dream. It's more like a nightmare. But God uses that to move him and motivate him. Right? Now, with that dream, I hope some of you are also asking the question, wait a minute, what kind of God is this that would send a dream to one man and not the others? So let's break that down, because people are always asking that question, and I think it is really, really worth asking. If you are not wrestling with these very, very hard things, gosh, you're not really doing the work of faith, because it's got to work. You've got to work at it. Now, we don't have the answer. But first you need to understand, Jerusalem had about 2,000 people in it at the time. And if you were in our Advent study, you would know this breakdown. That meant that children 2 and under would have been about 20 people. So there are 20 children that died. Now, I am not saying that to say, oh, it's not so bad. Because if one person dies, it is awful. And that's one of the things we've got to deal with, because we've got murder happening all around us all the time, and it's just become like a fabric of our life, right? And so it's not so bad. Or if someone gets shot but not killed, oh, that's not so bad, right? No! This is awful. So, no matter who dies, it is a horrible, horrible thing. Okay, does God allow it? Did God not intervene? I don't know. But this is what I can tell you. Joseph had already received a dream, and he had responded to it. And after he responded to that, what happened? The Magi show up, and they have these gifts, these amazing gifts, like as if to say, bing, 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 you got it right. Right? They confirmed all of those messages that Mary and Joseph had received. Any other parent in the town of Bethlehem, if they had received a message in a dream, someone's going to kill your child, they would have had no context to understand that. Anybody had one of those dreams where you dream something and you wake up and you go, that's crazy? Yeah, right? You can't make sense of it. It doesn't mean anything. So what do? You get up, you do laundry, you go to work, right? You just go about your everyday life. So we don't know that God didn't send dreams to everybody. We also don't know if maybe 2 children got out. Maybe they weren't the only ones to flee, but they went to a different country or they whatever. We would never know that because the story isn't about that. Okay? So I don't have an answer, but it is worth looking at. Right? And what we do know is God created Herod. God creates each and every one of us with the seed of the divine planted in us. But we must partner with God. We must be open and receptive to those messages. We must be working at that. And then we've got to be willing to endure all the stuff we don't like. Do you think Mary and Joseph wanted to go spend a couple of years over in Egypt? No. They had plans with their family in Jerusalem. They were going to raise Jesus with the... No, didn't happen. That's what God's provision often looks like. More like you lose a job, like that. You know what I'm talking about. You're like, no! And then there's some movement maybe that happens. Years later, you're like, I'm so glad that happened. Maybe you can see where there was an opening. But in the moment, it looks horrible, and you don't want it, right? So God is providing. God is caring for us in many, many ways. Dreams being one of them. Hopefully, other people got dreams, and maybe we just don't know what to do with them, or we didn't remember it that morning. Through gifts. Again, they could not have gone to Egypt without those gifts. That gold that showed up was their provision as they traveled to Egypt and they remained there. You think the Egyptians were thrilled that they were there? They wanted to give Joseph work and whatever? No. They had some gold from the Magi, and that's why they were able to do it. Even as Joseph gets the message to go back, parents, hear this one. Is it turning out the way Joseph wanted? Where does he want to go? He wants to go to Jerusalem. And he finds out that Herod's son, who is also awful and a murderer, he's like, oh, I don't want to go there. And he gets the message, go somewhere else. Right? By the way, Nazareth was not anywhere that he wanted to go and raise a child. He gets that message and he goes. There's no homecoming for this family. None. There is no happy ending in that story at this time of Jesus' life. What we find out at this time of Jesus' life is actually what we're going to hear later in Scripture around chapter 8, that what? The Son of God has nowhere to lay his head. Foxes have holes, birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Never did. Never did. When he was born, he's put in a manger, an animal feeding trough, right? And now they're on the run. That is the life of Jesus' early days. His childhood is like that. But it still is God's provision, God's nurturing and caring. The fact that in our study we talked about Joseph. The fact that he had Joseph as a father who was receptive and willing to get up in the middle of the night and go. Just go. We got the message. Okay, we're out of here. Because, of course, it might have been safer to leave in. That's the Father, the earthly Father that God gave to Jesus. God is putting those people in our lives, too. So sometimes through very trusting and faithful parents. Sometimes through the sending or the plucking out of us in situations. Again, I hope you've got some of those stories. Did God send you somewhere? Or did God take you out of something that saved you from something? either one of them. God isn't always just leading, go forward. Sometimes God is grabbing us by the back of the neck and saying, nope, that's not where you're supposed to be. Either one of those things can actually be God's leading. So, lots of ways that God shows up. Through surprises and unexpected turns, through gifts, through dreams, that unexpected plans. And this is what I wish for you in this new year. May God surprise you. May you receive God's gifts and God's messages. May you move, roll with God's leading and changes of plans for you in your life in this year. Amen. So,